For 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, reading is powerful. As we celebrate School Library Month, we honor the sanctuaries of knowledge that shape young minds and inspire lifelong learning. School libraries are more than just rooms filled with books. They are gateways to imagination, innovation, and discovery that remain steadfast in their mission to cultivate critical thinking and foster a love for reading. Let us recognize the tireless efforts of those who curate diverse collections, provide invaluable resources, and serve as mentors to our students. As we commemorate School Library Month, let us reaffirm our commitment to supporting these vital institutions. Together, let us ensure that every student has access to the transformative power of knowledge within the walls of a school library. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 1160 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 72, House Resolution 1160. Resolved that upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill, H.R. 8034, making emergency supplemental appropriations to respond to the situation in Israel and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 30 minutes of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees, and 2, 1 motion to recommit. Section 2, at any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill, H.R. 8035, making emergency supplemental appropriations to respond to the situation in Ukraine and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 30 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The amendment printed in Part A of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the Whole. The bill as amended shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. No further amendment to the bill as amended shall be in order except those printed in Part B of the report of the Committee on Rules. Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such further amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill as amended to the House with such further amendments as may have been adopted. In the case of sundry further amendments reported from the committee, the question of their adoption shall be put to the House in gross and without division of the question. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit. Section 3. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill, H.R. 8036, making emergency supplemental appropriations for assistance for the Indo-Pacific region and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 30 minutes of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees. 2. The amendment printed in Part C of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution, if offered by the member designated in the report, which shall be in order without intervention of any point of order, shall be considered as read, shall be separately debatable for the time specified in the report. equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. And 3, one motion to recommit. Section 4, at any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill, H.R. 8038, to authorize the President to impose certain sanctions with respect to Russia and Iran and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 30 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The amendment printed in Part D of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the Whole. The bill as amended shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. No further amendment to the bill as amended shall be in order except those printed in Part E of the report of the Committee on Rules. Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such further amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill as amended to the House with such further amendments as may have been adopted. In the case of sundry further amendments reported from the committee, the question of their adoption shall be put to the House engrossed and without division of the question. The previous question shall be considered as order on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit. Section 5. During consideration of H.R. 8035 and H.R. 8038, the chair may entertain a motion that the committee rise only if offered by the majority leader or his designee. The chair may not entertain a motion to strike out the enacting words of the bill as described in Clause 9 of Rule 18. Section 6A. Upon disposition of the bills specified in subsection D, the House shall be considered to have taken from the Speaker's table the bill, H.R. 815, to amend Title 38, United States Code, to make certain improvements relating to the eligibility of veterans to receive reimbursement for emergency treatment furnished through the Veterans Community Care Program and for other purposes, with the Senate amendment thereto, and to have concurred in the Senate amendment with an amendment inserting the respective text of all bills specified in subsection D as passed by the House in lieu of the matter proposed to be inserted by the Senate. B. The engrossment of the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 815, the clerk shall, 1. Assign appropriate designations to provisions within the engrossment. 2. Conform cross-references and provisions for short titles within the engrossment. 3. Be authorized to make technical corrections to include corrections in spelling, punctuation, page and line numbering, section numbering, and inserting appropriate headings. And 4. Relocate Section 3 in the matter preceding Division A of the text of H.R. 8038 to a new section immediately prior to Division A within the engrossment. C. Upon transmission to the Senate of a message that the House has concurred in the Senate amendment to H.R. 815 with an amendment, the bills specified in subsection D that have passed the House shall be laid on the table. D. The bills referred to in subsections A and C are as follows: H.R. 8034, H.R. 8035, H.R. 8036, and H.R. 8038.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, for the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Ranking Member McGovern, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of the resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I further ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, late last night, the Rules Committee met and reported a rule, House Resolution 1160, providing for consideration of 4 measures. H.R. 8034, the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act under a closed rule. H.R. 8036, the Indo-Pacific Supplemental Appropriation Act under a structured rule, H.R. 8035, the Ukraine Security Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2024, under a structured rule, and H.R. 8038, the 21st Century Peace Through Strength Act, under a structured rule. The rule further provides that after the House's consideration of these measures, the Senate will be quickly able to put the consideration of the legislation that we passed. Mr. Speaker, today it's important that we support the underlying rule and the underlying legislation. Specifically, I rise in support of our allies after the attack on Israel by Iran 10 days ago. That unprecedented attack has reaffirmed the need for strong American leadership and support for our allies abroad, especially Israel, and now our allies in the Indo-Pacific. I'm well aware there have been concerns in our conference and really on both sides of the House about the southern border and the national debt. As a member from Texas, as a member of the Budget Committee, I fully understand these concerns and I share all of them. But the requirement for America to assert itself as the leader of the free world is not optional. It's not a requirement we can put on pause. Israel has been attacked. China talks menacingly about reunification with Taiwan. Ukraine is in crisis and is in need of our help to survive Russian aggression. Now, I would say to the President, this legislation on the floor today perhaps could have been facilitated by some leadership from the executive branch. But despite the circumstances that brought us here, we stand before the House to support our allies and reaffirm America's leadership on the world stage. H.R. 8034, the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act, will provide much-needed material support to the Jewish state as it faces twin threats from Hamas and the Islamic Republic of Iran. This includes $4 billion to replenish Israel's Iron Dome and over $1 billion for the Iron Beam defense system. H.R. 8036, the Indo-Pacific Security Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2024, will work to counter the Chinese Communist Party and create a strong deterrence in the region, while 8035, the Ukraine Supplemental Appropriations Act, will assist Ukraine as they counter Russian aggression. Of the latter, all financial assistance to Ukraine's government is converted into a loan, ensuring that the Ukrainian government is held accountable to the American people. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that our failure in Afghanistan was the spark in the tinderbox that led to the subsequent invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And that conflict had been smoldering for a long time, certainly at least since 2014 in two previous administrations. Had the administration in 2014, as well as the current administration, had more foresight to provide aid and arms to Ukraine before February of 2022, there might have been a different set of circumstances that we were contemplating today, and there might have been a more swift resolution to this conflict with the saving of untold lives. Mr. Speaker, I stand with my colleagues requesting more information from the administration. The American people deserve answers about how previous funding has been used. They deserve answers about what are the long-term goals by the administration to resolve this conflict. I welcome more oversight. I welcome additional information from the administration, and will continue to push its accountability. But today we are at an inflection point, and the longer we wait, the more expensive any solution to this conflict will become, both in terms of dollars and lives. Lack of aid now could cost us much more dearly later, and I don't want that to become a reality, and I would hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle feel the same. I urge passage of the rule, I urge passage of the underlying legislation Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the world is watching. It is time for Congress to act, and act we must. America's allies have been waiting for this Republican majority to get their act together. People are dying in Ukraine. Democracy is on the line in Ukraine, and this Republican majority has been twiddling their thumbs. I'm glad my friends have finally come to realize the gravity of the situation and the urgency of getting this aid to our allies. And what have Republicans done? Nothing. No action to help our allies. It's all delay, distract, deny, and blame Joe Biden. Ukrainians are fighting for democracy, theirs and ours, and they have been set back as a result of Republican extremism. They have suffered because of Republican inaction. I'll remind my friends, Ukrainians didn't choose this war. It chose them. 2 years ago, when Putin illegally crossed the border and invaded, he was banking on the United States and our allies to grow weary. He was hoping we would give up. He was hoping we would do nothing. He was betting we would abandon our friends and our internal divisions would leave us in disarray, at odds with one another. I hope Putin is wrong, Mr. Speaker, because after 2 years of unrelenting war, Ukrainians are still willing to hold the line. I visited Ukraine with former Speaker Pelosi shortly after Putin attacked them. And we learned about the particularly cruel nature in which Putin has been fighting this war. If you care about human rights, you have to care about what's happening in Ukraine. And that's what this is all about. Ukrainians are still ready to defend their democracy, but they cannot continue to do so without our support. And I won't sugarcoat it here. Ukraine's defense of democracy has suffered because there's a faction here in this House, a MAGA minority, that doesn't want to compromise. They don't want to take this vote because they're afraid of what the outcome might be. Not that it will fail, but that it will succeed. The argument might hold sway in the Kremlin, Mr. Speaker, but this is the United States, and we are the People's House, an institution designed to reflect the will of the majority. And today, the majority's voice is being heard here on the House floor. Not a majority of one state, one party, or one faction, but a majority that wants to help Ukraine hold the line. A majority that says, bring these bills to the floor for an up or down vote. Democrats are providing the votes necessary to advance this legislation to the floor, because at the end of the day, so much more is at stake here than petty partisanship, brinksmanship. Putin is looking to rebuild the Soviet Union, and mark my words, he will not stop at Ukraine. Anybody who thinks that is delusional. And if the world doesn't help them defend their democracy, this war will not end. It will grow. Look, Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with everything in this package. I have deep, deep problems about the unconditioned aid to Israel. I was among the first calling for a ceasefire, and I still call for a ceasefire. I've demanded more humanitarian aid for civilians in Gaza, and I will continue to do so. I've called for a two-state solution. I believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu is putting Israel on a path that, quite frankly, undermines his own country's security. And I'm outraged by his cruelty and his inhumanity toward the people of Gaza and the West Bank. There's no justification for that. There's none. Israel has a right to defend itself. Nobody questions that. But what is happening now, I believe, is outrageous and unconscionable. But we will have separate debates, and we will have separate votes on all of these bills. And people can decide where they want to be. And quite frankly, some Republicans wanted a different path. They wanted to extort this rule for a campaign ad on border security for Donald Trump. We almost had no Ukraine aid because that's what some of my Republican friends wanted and advocated for. And they advocated for a bill with no humanitarian aid for anybody who is suffering, not just in Gaza, but also in Ukraine and in other parts of the world. And they wanted all this kind of ugly border security language attached to this measure. Look, there's a lot at stake at this moment. And we're all supposed to be grown-ups. We should act like it. Let's proceed in a way that allows everyone to vote their conscience. And with that, I reserve.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserved. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'm pleased to recognize the Chairman of the Committee on Appropriations, Mr. Cole from Oklahoma, for 4 minutes.
For 4 minutes. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank my very good friend from Texas, my classmate, my colleague when I served on the Rules Committee, and now I'm very proud to say our very distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee. Today's rule makes in order a series of 3 critical security supplemental bills, Mr. Speaker, paired with a 4th bill covering other high-priority national security matters. Collectively, these bills represent the commitment to move much-needed security assistance funding for America's friends and partners. Mr. Speaker, the members of the Rules Committee faced a serious challenge in putting together today's resolution, but they met that challenge in admirable bipartisan fashion. I can't tell you how proud I am of both sides of the aisle, including my friend, the distinguished ranking member, for the manner in which they responded to this particular difficulty. Today's rule creates a full and fair process for floor consideration of these measures. It grants ample debate time on these bills and makes in order a series of amendments, ensuring that the entire body has the opportunity to work its will and make our voices heard. It ensures that members have a full 72 hours to review these bills before the vote. After all, taking up this matter, a matter as important as this, both members of Congress and the American people deserve no less. Finally, it provides an up or down vote on each of these bills. Importantly, this rule allows every member to vote his or her conscience on every issue. Thanks to this process, the House will be able to work its will. That's the way the founders intended this institution to work. Speaker Johnson's work in setting this process in motion has been admirable, and we all owe him our thanks for ensuring both that the House takes up these critical funding measures and that each member can vote his or her conscience on every single issue. Mr. Speaker, the need for this funding is not hypothetical. Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan are on the front lines of the struggle to preserve democracy and freedom around the world. In the case of Ukraine and Israel, these 2 nations are quite literally in harm's way. Ukraine is entering the 3rd year of their struggle against Vladimir Putin's unjust and illegal invasion. Its continued ability to resist hangs in the balance dependent on foreign aid. Its people need the weapons and ammunition provided in this bill to keep them in the fight. Israel, meanwhile, is involved in a life and death struggle against the perpetrators of the October 7th terror attack, Hamas. Over the weekend, Hamas backer and the Iranian regime launched an unprecedented and direct aerial assault on Israel. That attack has been thwarted, and an appropriate response is underway. And Taiwan faces ongoing threats from the Chinese Communist Party, which continues to threaten Taiwan's right of self-determination. Around the world, the United States and our partners are confronting a tinderbox of uninvited aggression on multiple fronts. America must stand firmly on the side of freedom. Peace through strength cannot be delivered through appeasement. Taken together, these measures protect our friends and partners and replenish America's stockpile of ammunition, weapons, and supplies. This is not only about safeguarding our ideals of democracy and peace, but it's central to our own national security. I would encourage all members to vote to support the rule and the underlying legislation. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.
I'll reserve.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, champion for human rights, Mr. Doggett.
How many minutes? The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Those who committed atrocities against Israelis on October 7th were not martyrs. They were murderers and rapists. But neither were those murderers children. And the children of Gaza have paid an incredible cost for Netanyahu's massive assault. His policies have shown conscious indifference to children, to journalists, to humanitarian aid workers, to civilians in general. I believe strongly in Israel's right to self-defense, but that does not require dropping hundreds of 200-pound non-precision dumb bombs in densely populated areas. Nor does it require laying a medieval-type siege denying water, food, and medicine, using famine as a weapon. Nor does it require killing not only World Central Kitchen aid workers, but so many others. This rule gives us a proper opportunity to finally, belatedly, vote to help desperate Ukraine from Putin's war crimes and offensive, without voting to support Netanyahu. But the rule, I believe, improperly rejected amendments that would have permitted a vote in support of Israel's right to self-defense without embracing Netanyahu's wrongful policies, which are killing the innocent, sacrificing the hostages, and endangering Israel's long-term security. Sending more offensive weapons to Netanyahu while begging him not to use them simply does not protect Rafah and others from an assault. I would vote to defend Israel, but do not want to be complicit in providing weapons for an assault on Rafah that will cause thousands of deaths and likely lead to a wider and tragic war. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, now I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to a valuable member of the Committee on Rules, Mr. Massey of Kentucky.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 2 minutes.
I truly thank the chairman for yielding me time because he knows I'm slightly opposed to the rule, so he's very gracious. I'm concerned that the Speaker's cut a deal with the Democrats to fund foreign wars rather than to secure our border. But what I want to talk about today is process. The bill that will come out of the House after all of this is a bill that began as H.R. 815 to expand the eligibility for veterans to receive reimbursements for their emergency care. How did a bill that was intended for veterans that came out of the House become a bill that may bring us to the brink of war at least 3 places on the globe by sending $100 billion to military contractors? Well, it started in the House, and then the Senate took it and stripped every word from the bill. Why did they do this? Were they trying to get around the origination clause in the Constitution? Were they trying to shortcut some process? It's one of those things. But what we've got now is a collection of bills, and I do appreciate that we get individual votes on 4 of these bills, but they include $100 billion. They don't include securing our border. They include a bill called the Repo Act, which could call into question the value of our Treasury bills when we go out to auction those next, if we are going to confiscate Treasury bills that we sold to other countries. It also includes a bill that allows the president to ban websites based on his discretion. I'm concerned about that. This bill, H.R. 815, started as a veterans bill, went to the Senate, got gutted, became the foreign aid package bill. Now here in the House, we're going to vote on 4 separate titles, but we're going to package them back as amendments to that H.R. 815. So we're actually going to send it back to the Senate as the bill they sent to us, which is the gutted veterans bill. I know this is all confusing, but why is this all being done this way? Some will say to force the Senate's hand, but really what it's going to do is jam the Senate, the conservatives in the Senate who would like to have a more fulsome debate. And with that, I am opposed to the rule, and I thank the chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves.
Hey, Tom.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentlewoman from New Mexico, a valued member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
The gentlewoman from New Mexico is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, today, after months of delay that cost the loss of the Ukrainian military advantage, that cost children's lives and access to food and aid, that allowed China to threaten the Indo-Pacific, Congress will finally vote. Congress is finally going to vote to fund the fight against the tyranny of Russia, Iran, and China, the fight for democracy and peace. Why did it take us this long? Yesterday in Rules, the Republican chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee noted that every Republican president since the Soviet Union era has stood on the right side of history and stood up to Russia. Presidents from Eisenhower to Reagan to Bush, Sr. and Jr., they all knew that Russia's desire to reassert its empire by bombing and invading its neighbor also harms America and American interests. Every Republican president, that is, until Donald Trump. In contrast to every president before him, Trump praised Putin, tried to do business in Russia, allowed Putin to gain the upper hand, and eventually denied Ukraine military aid Congress had approved unless Ukraine gave him dirt on Biden. Donald Trump became the Pied Piper for Putin. Some of Trump's most ardent followers in this House became Putin-protecting Republicans and denied the members of Congress this vote. Until now. Now is the moment. History has its eyes on this chamber as Democrats and Republicans stand up and stand together for what we love, democracy. Democracy is the very reason we get to sit here together today and debate in the People's House. Democracy is the best answer to tyranny, aggression, and depravity. It is our shared bipartisan love for democracy that best unites us with our allies around the world, allies that are once again united in our fight against Iran, China, and Russia, thanks to the leadership of President Biden, who repaired the damage Trump inflicted on our international relationships. I hope that shared love of a world where democracy is defended will also unite us in this chamber. I remind my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, that bipartisanship is a good thing. It's how America expects us to govern, and it is how we move one step closer to defeating the cruel regimes that seek to take the world backward. I yield back.
Yields back.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Texas, another valuable member of the Rules Committee, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Texas recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my distinguished colleague from Texas, and I very much appreciate his service, and I apologize that I'm here on the floor in opposition to a rule in his first week as the Rules Committee chairman. I have great respect for him. And the gentlelady was just essentially implying that for some reason this is somehow Donald Trump's fault. Ukraine was invaded by Russia under the watch of this president. That's the truth. And this incompetent president has led to the situation that we sit in right now. And people are dying in Ukraine, yes. But the problem is they're being funded with American debt. There is no skin in the game for the American people. We're not talking about tax increases. We're not doing anything to say that we're going to pay for this stuff as we rack up $1 trillion of debt every 3 months. But the truth is, Americans are dying, not just Ukrainians, at the hands of wide open borders, while literal hostiles flood into our country. Fentanyl pours into our streets. People are chanting death to America. And the response by Republicans is to pass a $1.7 trillion cap-busting spending bills under suspension of the rules, handing the keys to the NSA and Intel to continue spying on Americans. And now we're on the floor under a rule to give another $100 billion to fund war, unpaid for, with zero border security. Under a rule which Republicans should oppose because it is a process pre-designed to achieve the desired predetermined outcome with no border security. The individual votes on Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan and a sweetener bill for TikTok are belied by the fact they are being packaged together as an amendment to the Senate passed foreign aid bill. This was all pre-cooked. It's why President Biden and Chuck Schumer are praising it. The problem is there were 9 amendments handpicked by leadership in order, despite 300 amendments having been filed. Speaker Johnson said in January, if President Biden wants a supplemental spending bill focused on national security, it better begin with defending America's national security. We want to get the border closed and secured first. To that, I say amen. And where is that, Speaker Johnson? I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves.
I'll reserve.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah. Wow, Mr. Speaker. I guess the gentleman from Texas is unaware of the fact that there was a bipartisan border security deal that was agreed to that unfortunately House Republicans and Trump decided to kill. And I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record an Axios article entitled "Trump, House Republicans Plot to Kill Border Deal."
Objection.
I reserve my time.
Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr, of Financial Services Committee, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 2 minutes.
3 minutes. Three minutes.
It's for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, while I rise in support of the rule, and I thank Chairman Burgess for his leadership on giving members the opportunity to vote on these packages, I also rise to express my profound disappointment that the Biden administration and Democrats in this chamber have blocked from being ruled in order my amendment to cut off a blank check to Russia's war machine. President Biden, the U.S. Treasury Department, and congressional Democrats are so concerned about my amendment that they have prevented it from even being considered or debated before this body. Last October, the Biden administration renewed General License 8, which authorizes certain energy-related transactions involving Russian financial institutions. This license has now been renewed 8 times since the start of Russia's full-scale unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, and it continues to undermine measures designed to curtail Russia's energy revenues. This license, which is the architecture of the Biden foreign policy on Ukraine, has become a lifeline for Vladimir Putin. It is the symbol of President Biden's weakness on Russia, the primary avenue through which he is financing Russia's war machine. And it is the most prominent example of how the Biden administration's radical climate agenda has collided with its stated policy to counter Russian aggression. And it shows how the Biden administration's climate policy conflicts with our national security. Coincidentally, the current general license is set to expire on May 1st. My very timely amendment would prevent this renewal and would erode the energy profits that are refilling Putin's coffers and funding his war in Ukraine. The sanctions put in place by the Biden administration on Russia's energy sector, a principal source of revenue for the Kremlin, have been wholly inadequate. Russia's oil and gas revenues have been rising, and countries like India and China have been buying Russian oil well above the price cap put in place. Enforcement of the price cap has been poor, which has enabled Russia to find non-G7 insurers and ships for the transport of its seaborne crude much more quickly than anticipated. The ease with which Russia has been able to evade the price cap calls into question the efficacy and enforceability of the price cap. Moreover, another renewal of the general license next month would completely ignore the efforts Europe has finally made to diversify its energy supplies and reverse its dangerous pre-war reliance on Russian energy. General License 8 originally reflected the need to give countries that were dependent on Russian energy sufficient time to diversify their energy resources. But many of those countries have now effectively diversified their energy suppliers. Continued issuance of an overly broad general license in this instance threatens to repeat the mistakes made in relation to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, where the Biden administration's refusal to implement strong sanctions against the pipeline not only removed deterrence before the full-scale invasion.
The gentleman, additional minute.
The gentleman is yielded the extra minute.
Thank you. The Biden administration's refusal to implement strong sanctions against the pipeline not only removed deterrence before the full-scale invasion and invited Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but also allowed parts of Europe's dangerous reliance on Russian energy to continue until Putin's tanks had already rolled across Ukraine's borders. Rescinding the license would encourage our allies' efforts to rid themselves of reliance on Russian energy sources. It makes no sense to fund a needed resistance against Russia's unprovoked war against Ukraine while also allowing Russia to fill its war machine coffers through its sale of energy to the rest of the world. Biden can't have his cake and eat it too. It's just ridiculous. He cannot pursue a radical anti-fossil energy climate crusade at home and hope to keep energy prices low. Similarly, he can't keep the flow of Russian crude on the world markets to bolster global supply while reducing Moscow's revenues through an unenforceable price cap. The only way to truly punish Moscow and deprive Putin of the financial support he needs to materially to prosecute the war is by removing the general license on the energy-related transactions facilitated by sanctioned Russian banks. I urge my colleagues to support this rule, but I want the American people to understand the weakness that the Biden administration is showing towards Russia. With that, I yield.
I'll reserve.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Michigan. Massachusetts is recognized.
I reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I would just ask if the gentleman from Massachusetts has additional speakers. If not, I'm prepared to close.
We're prepared to close.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the remaining time.
The gentleman is recognized.
So, Mr. Speaker, Democrats have had to make some tough decisions about how to vote on this rule. And let me tell you why I voted to support it last night. I have disagreements with many aspects of the various pieces of legislation that will come before us. And there are some of these pieces that I will vote against. But again, there will be separate votes and there'll be separate debates. But as we learned last night in the Rules Committee, the alternative that some of my Republican friends were pushing to this approach was an Israel-only package with no humanitarian aid, not just for the people of Gaza, but for any suffering people that the aid would benefit, and some really ugly border provisions, which I found unconscionable, and some other bad stuff as well. Democrats, once again, will be the adults in the room. And I'm so glad Republicans finally realize the gravity of this situation and the urgency with which we must act. But guess what, Mr. Speaker? You don't get an award around here for simply doing your damn job. President Biden told us last year, 6 months ago, over 6 months ago, that this was urgent and important, that Ukraine needed us, that Putin was not going to stop, that the war against the Ukrainians was particularly vicious. Every major human rights organization in the world has told us the impact of Russia's attack against Ukraine. The Senate voted months ago. The Senate can barely agree on what to have for lunch, and they voted months ago. And what did the House do? What did my House Republican friends do? Nothing. No action to help our allies. It's all delay, distract, deny, and blame Joe Biden. Now, I would just say to my colleagues, look at what MAGA extremism has gotten you. Nothing. Nothing. Not a damn thing. In fact, it has empowered Democrats at every critical juncture in this Congress. It has been Democrats who have been the ones to stand up for our country and do the right thing for the American people. Democrats ensured the U.S. didn't default on its debt last year, in case anybody forgot. Democrats supplied the votes to keep the government running in September of last year, in November of last year, and in March of this year. Democrats supplied the votes to pass the National Defense Authorization Act. Democrats supplied the votes for the tax relief bill that passed earlier this year. Democrats have done the job that Republicans have refused to do. And again, we have different priorities, and I think based on what I've heard in this last Congress, different values. And we don't even agree on a lot of what has come before the full House. But Democrats have done the job that Republicans have refused to do. And we don't want an award for it. We don't want a trophy for showing up to work. All we want is for Republicans to do their job, stop blaming Joe Biden for their own incompetence, and work with our side to find common ground. We are in a divided government. A Democrat is president, a democratically controlled Senate, and we have a narrow Republican majority here in the House. Nobody's going to get everything they want. We have to work together. We have to compromise. And I hope today's vote loosens the grip that MAGA extremism has on this body, and especially when it comes to supporting our allies. You know, the Rules Committee is the committee that has been known as the traffic cop of Congress. Every bill of consequence comes through the Rules Committee. I mean, we set the bills, for debate, set the bills for debate on the House floor. The last bill that the Rules Committee reported that actually became law was almost 10 months ago. All the other bills that we have sent that have been over to the White House, Senate and the White House to become law, it had to be brought up under different processes and procedures. I mean, let that sink in. Something's not working here. And you either want to be a body that is constructive and that gets stuff done, or you just want to be, a party that just obstructs everything and gets nothing done. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing to show for all the yelling and screaming and finger pointing that we see on a regular basis on this House floor. My friends have to choose. History's going to judge them by how they answer one simple question. Are they going to work together with Democrats and, in this case, stand with our allies and stand for America? Or are they going to throw in their lot with MAGA, Trump, and Putin? We are living in very uncertain times, Mr. Speaker, and people around the world are counting on this country to stand up and lead. People in Ukraine, people in Taiwan, people in Gaza, people in Israel. The eyes of the world are on this body. There's a lot of things in this package I disagree with. And in my opening statement, I talked about my concern about the unconditioned aid package to Israel, which and my concern that Netanyahu's government is not moving in a direction that, quite frankly, is a direction that I think will lead to more security for Israel, but exactly the opposite. I worry that what he is doing is, quite frankly, a violation of the human rights of so many innocent people in Gaza and in the West Bank. I was hoping that they would pursue a different pathway, and instead we now hear that he wants to go into Rafah. There's a famine happening in Gaza. People are starving to death. Aid is being frustrated from getting there. Food, medicine, important supplies. People are dying. Surely we should all care about that. We should be able to advocate for Israel's security, but also advocate for the people of Gaza, children of Gaza, senior citizens, people who are just trying to get on with their lives. But notwithstanding that, notwithstanding the fact that we may have disagreed, and some of my Republican friends obviously disagree that we ought to be, whether we should be helping Ukraine or not. I disagree with you. Fine. But that we have a process that you will be able to vote on all of these things separately, and you'll be able to make your views clear. But I got to tell you, you don't have to agree on everything to agree on something, and we ought to agree that these issues are important enough to debate and to have up or down votes on. The people who are advocating that we do nothing, or that we attach things to this bill that will guarantee that it goes nowhere in the Senate, and therefore we help nobody. I don't understand why you're even here, quite frankly. We need to move this process forward. The House has to function. And as we've seen under Republican control, that only happens when Democrats are the adults in the room. And I say that not to be partisan. I say that because that's what's been happening. I gave you a list of things that needed to be done, not just in terms of helping our allies, but in terms of saving our economy, that could not have been done unless Democrats stood up and behaved like adults. And this should have been dealt with a long time ago, months ago. But here we are. And so I hope that we proceed, that we have rational and thoughtful debate, knowing that we will have disagreements and knowing that some of us will have different ideas on how we should proceed forward. But this is the United States House of Representatives. We are supposed to debate issues We are supposed to vote on things. And unfortunately, this has become a place where trivial issues get debated passionately and important ones not at all. Well, these are important issues that are in this bill. Again, some of them I agree with, some of them I don't agree with. But let's debate them, let's vote on them, and then let's move on. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman from Massachusetts yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will yield myself the balance of our time.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, our adversaries, notably Russia, China, Iran, are watching to see how we will respond. Our reaction to these crises will determine how they will choose to proceed. An important difference between this package of bills today and the previously passed Senate supplemental is the addition of the 21st Century Peace Through Strength Act. Legislation is important as it includes sanctions and policies that counter our adversaries through the inclusion of the Repo Act and the removal of our payment for foreign pensions and requiring the administration to provide a game plan in Ukraine, something that many of us have been asking for some time. Ronald Reagan told us peace comes through strength. By failing to act now, it will signal the opposite of strength, and it will invite future aggression, as failure to act has done so often in the past. Mr. Speaker, I also feel obligated to point out that this Congress has had 2 votes on providing aid to Israel. One that occurred in October, right after Speaker Johnson was elected. Indeed, it was one of his highest priorities. And I thought responsibly that aid package was offset through cuts to other federal agencies here. Senator Schumer didn't see it that way. He said, we've never conditioned aid to Israel with anything, so it has to be no offset, can't be paid for. So the House, in February of this year, I think it was Mr. Calvert of California who had a bill to provide the same aid to Israel without the offset. And it was blocked. Blocked this time by people on my side. So the Speaker said, okay, let's bring it up under suspension. Maybe we can get agreement between members on both sides, but in fact, under suspension, the 2/3 majority required was not achieved. So that bill failed in February as well. Had any one of those bills passed, we might not be here today, because we all know a week, 10 days ago, Iran attacked Israel, missiles and drones originating from Iranian soil, first time that's ever happened, and the crisis advanced. Yes, we did have an opportunity to provide that aid to Israel. Might not have been what my friend from Massachusetts would have wanted, but at the same time, we had the opportunity to provide that. And unfortunately, now even members of my committee are upset with where we are today, but we had the opportunity to sort of head off all of this problem by simply passing that aid package last February, and we wouldn't do it. So what happens if we don't do this today? Does it get better or worse for us down the road? Nobody knows the answer to that, but history tells us it is very likely to get worse. So we've got 2 votes now, Mr. Speaker. Israel aid, and on both counts, I think most of us in this body want to see that pass. I will stress again that weakness invites aggression, and we cannot allow our allies in the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific and the Ukraine to be abandoned. By doing so, we will not prevent future aggression, but we will invite it. Today, we have an opportunity to deliver critical aid to our allies, and I believe it's appropriate to do so. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time. I move the previous question on the resolution.
The gentleman yield back. Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on adopting the resolution. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The resolution.
Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose, gentleman from Texas, seeker?
I would ask for a recorded vote.
Does the gentleman ask for the yeas and nays?
Yes.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question is postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess subject to the call of the chair.